revealing secrets of the Earth and stars.
This will be the hottest place in the universe.
And blurring lines between minds and machines.
Wow. That is impressive.
Irish scientists have their fingers on the pulse.
This week on 10 Things to Know About, we're investigating superbugs and the threat they pose to global health.
With antibiotics and antibiotic-resistant bacteria being flushed down our drains literally every single day, could our waterways become highways for superbugs? I'm sporting this season's waders to find out.
And I find out how this little guy could play a role in bringing our medicine back to the dark ages.
Imagine a world where a simple throat infection could kill you. That was the grim reality until Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, which was then developed as the world's first true antibiotic. By the 1940s, doctors could treat deadly bacterial diseases and the medical world was utterly transformed. But the modern age of medicine has, if anything, been too successful. And the overuse of these antibiotics has meant that the bacteria are starting to fight back. The UN's World Health Organization recently released its first ever list of the world's most dangerous superbugs. These bacteria are responsible for often deadly infections and diseases. And if no action is taken, even common conditions like pneumonia, gonorrhea and food poisoning could become impossible to treat with antibiotics. I'm in Geneva to meet Dr Marc Sprenger, Director of Antimicrobial Resistance at the World Health Organization.
So Marc, what is antimicrobial resistance, or AMR as it's also known?
That means that bacteria or viruses do have the ability to resist drugs. And you will die because of these infectious diseases. And of course we are not used to that, but that is already happening.
How big a threat is this globally?
In my view, it's a huge threat because modern medicine is totally dependent on antibiotics. If they are not working, we are not able to do cancer treatment, hip replacement, caesarean section. All these things depend on antibiotics. If you look at the figures, in Europe we know at least we have 25,000 people every year dying because of resistance. And to be honest, I think this is only the tip of the iceberg.
Would you say that this threat of AMR could be something as big as climate change?
Modern medicine is really dependent on effective antibiotics. So if we are not able to use this, we are not able to continue with our modern medicine. So I would say that this is really a big threat. Climate change is one, but for me this is another major threat.
The prospect of returning to a world without antibiotics is truly terrifying, and as we've seen, is also much closer than any of us would wish.
One person who's all too aware of the tragic consequences of contracting a superbug is Margaret Dawson. In 2002, Margaret's husband Joe went into hospital for an operation on his spine. Apart from a problem with discs in his back, he was a healthy 58-year-old at the time.
Joe was he socialised a lot. He liked his pint. We were married very young and we had 4 beautiful children. But when we had all those reared with great plans, we were going to sort of work hard and give them a good education, and then we were going to travel the world. But however, it never happened.
The operation initially went well, but 5 weeks later, Margaret was told that Joe had picked up an infection and would have to take antibiotics.
I didn't know what was wrong at this stage. Nobody was coming forward to tell me what was wrong. And one evening, a sister of the ward came along and she asked me to go for a cup of tea. And she took me out of sight, so nobody would see her speaking with me, and told me that Joe had an MRSA infection. And that was the first that I knew about MRSA. Even at that stage, I didn't know what it meant at all.
MRSA is bacterium that is resistant to many standard antibiotics, and patients who have operations are particularly at risk. Joe's long and painful illness required many operations, including having his leg amputated to treat a blocked artery. Margaret cared for him at home for 14 years, until his death in 2016.
It's horrendous, and it's worrying, and it's frightening. Hand hygiene is so important. People should not go through the hospital without using the hand hygiene facilities that are there. We need to talk more about it. Medical staff understand it. Now we need to get the public to understand it and to be aware of what infection can do, and what can happen to a patient if they pick up an infection. Miss Joe terrible. It's lonely. It's coming up to his first anniversary. But life goes on. But I do miss him, and I will always miss him.
Margaret's experience of MRSA is heartbreaking, but her desire to educate people about the importance of hand washing is shared by Professor Martin Cormican, Ireland's leading expert in resistant bacteria.
Hygiene is particularly important, obviously, in a healthcare setting, but even in ordinary life. Learning how to do your hands properly can reduce your risk of getting quite a lot of infections, and not just antibiotic-resistant bugs. Actually, even your chances of getting colds and flu.
Because we can't treat superbugs, preventative measures are essential. And while it may seem obvious, hand washing remains the single most effective way to prevent the spread of infection. So what are we going to do?
So here's a big plate. It's got stuff kind of like jelly on it that we call agar. And you can put your hand right, and it's sterile, so you can put your hand right into the middle of this, and then we can come back later and we can see what bacteria have grown. Yeah.
So we're doing a before and after?
Yeah, if you put your hands on now, and then we'll see what grows from it, and you can wash your hands and do it again.
It's a bit slimy. Okay, so I can see my handprint is there.
Yeah.
Go forth and multiply, bacteria.
That's right.
After washing my hands the way I would normally, Martin gets me to put them on a second agar plate. And then finally, using a technique similar to the way surgeons scrub in, Martin shows me how we should all be washing our hands.
You get the palm of your hand, and now we get your wrist.
It's like the Macarena.
Yeah. And then, we turn off with elbows, not with hands, so that you don't recontaminate your hands. Okay.
So these should be pristine hands now, Martin?
Yes.
Now I've tried my best to wash all the bacteria off my hands, it's time to compare the three plates. First up, it's my unwashed hands. Okay.
And what you can see here is that there's lots of bacteria growing, and you can see where your fingertips went down.
Yeah.
There's lots of bacteria in the fingertips. So
no
that's your regular
surprise there,
hand.
I suppose.
No surprise there. These are the kind of bacteria that we normally expect to find in somebody's hands.
All right.
So what do you expect to find when you look at the plate where you washed your hands the regular way?
Well, I would imagine
Not much
I was going to
difference.
say, I imagine, maybe a fifth, but actually that looks like almost exactly the same amount of bacteria as if I had not washed my hands.
Yeah, and it is almost exactly the same. So these are the places that you miss when you do your hands. So the way people mostly do their hands, then they miss key parts of the hand. And then what do you expect to see when you look at the one where you did it by the book?
Well, not complete. Oh, I know it is.
Yeah,
wow,
so
that
pretty
is,
much nothing on it.
There doesn't seem to be any colonies there.
So it's not a perfect procedure, but generally speaking, if you do it by the book, there'll be very, very little left afterwards.
I'll be drumming this into my kids now when I go home. Very good. Washing our hands more thoroughly is an easy way to help reduce the spread of antibiotic resistance. But we need to improve our hygiene habits and tackle our overuse of antibiotics now.
This is not eventually, this has already happened. And that's the problem with resistance. It's that change that has come about in bacteria, and it's been driven by our use of antibiotics over the last 7 decades. And usually what's happened is that there's been a change in that bug's DNA. It's picked up a little piece of DNA that allows it to do something that it used to be able to do, and that's the change.
But of course, it's not just healthcare.
No, it's not just healthcare. We also have to get better about using less antibiotics in agriculture, for example. There's work to do there, but also in terms of the wider environment.
As harmful bacteria thrive and multiply, they can pass on resistance into the wider environment. Yet despite the global nature of antibiotic resistance in the environment, surprisingly little attention has been given to the natural highways that connect entire continents. Dr. Fiona Walsh is the Irish lead on an EU-wide project aiming to find out more. Fiona, what role does water play in antibiotic resistance?
It's really the place that everything flows into. So if you imagine what's coming out of us, what's coming out of farms, all ends up in rivers, basically. So if there's antibiotic resistance coming out of those, it's going into the river or going into water. So the question is, what is happening after the wastewater is treated? Is it releasing antibiotics and antibiotic-resistant bacteria into somewhere like here, into a nice clean river that might have natural antibiotic resistance, but that the levels will increase then as well?
Presumably, though, this is such a global problem that every factory and every processing plant has some sort of antibiotic resistance filter to stop?
Unfortunately, no. So antibiotic resistance, even in terms of what's coming out of wastewater treatment plants, there are no regulations, there's no guidelines globally. So this isn't just an Irish problem, this is an EU and a global problem. So there's nobody saying you need to test for this, you need to look for it. So nobody looks for it except for the research that we're actually doing. The bacteria that we test for are called coliforms, and they're the ones that the EPA, so the Environmental Protection Agency or the EU regulators would test for. And they test rivers like this, they test our lakes and our beaches. So when they collect the samples, they also bring them back to a lab and test them for the bacteria that we're going to test them for.
Off you go. The STARE project is the first study to measure the antibiotics, antibiotic-resistant bacteria and genes released from wastewater treatment plants across Europe.
So what you can see in the water is obviously a lot of plants and different things, and bacteria live on all of those as well. But we're not worried about those. Those do no harm. So what we want to look for are the ones that are a sign of poo pollution, essentially, because they can make us sick.
Let's bring this back to the lab.
Okay.
Fiona, this is your lab. What are we going to do now?
So what we want to do is filter the sample. What happens when we have bacteria called coliforms? So coliforms are the bacteria that show that there's fecal contamination in the water. So basically poo in the water to some level. And those bacteria will be blue on the plate. So we'll have a lot of different bacteria from the water, but we're only interested in the blue ones.
So this is the safety moment, is it?
This is the safety moment, yeah.
Okay.
So this is our sample.
Okay.
And we just put it on top of the filter paper. So then we just put it onto our agar plate.
And this will allow the bacteria to grow.
Yeah, so that's all of the food the bacteria need in there to grow. So what you can see on these here
pretty.
Are different coloured bacteria with different numbers. So when they're so busy like those plates, you can't count them. So you need to dilute it to count them out.
So each of these colours represents a different type of bacteria?
Yes, so bacteria react differently to the chemicals that are in the agar that we put in. The blue ones are the ones that we are particularly interested in.
Once you've identified these coliforms, you can then check and see if they're resistant to a number of antibiotics. Is that the idea?
Exactly, yeah. So we know that they're definitely resistant to one antibiotic. The question is, if this type of bacteria was in a person, can it be treated by something, or is it one of the multi-drug resistant bacteria?
And they're the ones we're really worried about.
They're the ones that are essentially superbugs. So the superbugs are the ones that are very difficult to treat.
Ultimately, Fiona's work will help measure the types and levels of antibiotic resistance entering rivers from wastewater treatment plants. And it's only when we have the full picture that we can start to deal with the problem.
It's always a case of if we don't know what's there, we've no way of actually preventing it and making sure that it doesn't happen again. So that's really what our research in this project is about. It's looking first to see what's coming out of the wastewater treatment plants within EU wastewater treatment plants, but then also saying what are the potential things we can do to stop this? Can we add things on to those plants to do that?
The search for the next antibiotic has taken scientists to some pretty strange places. But for a truly weird place, it's time that we looked at ourselves in the mirror, and specifically at the beard. Whether trimmed or flowing, beards are most definitely back. But not only that, they are now part of the fight back against superbugs. The Swab and Send programme based in Liverpool is pioneering the search for the next generation of antibiotics. People from all over the world literally swab a sample from anything or anywhere and send it into the programme where it is grown and tested to see if it can kill indicator bacteria. Intrigued by the medicinal mysteries of the moustache, researchers at the programme turned their attention to swabbing the beards of a hirsute handful and were astonished to see that in many cases the samples were actually killing off other bacteria. You see, down at the level of bacteria and fungi, the competition rages. In the fight for food, space, and resources, antibiotics are one of the best weapons in this miniature arms race. So potent are some of these weapons that the facial hair of one hipster was even found to contain an antibiotic that was capable of knocking out a particularly drug-resistant form of E. coli. In the fight against superbugs, forget the face masks. Beards could be the best body armour known to man. Turns out the next generation of antibiotics could be literally under your nose. See you next time.
We probably don't give it much thought, but antibiotics are an integral part of agriculture. Antibiotics are routinely added to the diets of pigs and poultry to help prevent them becoming sick. But then these animals can act as a reservoir for resistant genes, increasing the likelihood of the spread of resistance. So, can you rear animals without using antibiotics? Laura, why are antibiotics used in agriculture?
Well, Katrina, antibiotics are used in all forms of animal production to treat sick animals, but also to prevent disease. So at periods in the animals' lives where they're at high risk of acquiring infection.
And when are those high stress moments in their life?
Okay, well, say for pigs, for example, I suppose on the day that they're weaned, they experience multiple stressors. So they're removed from their mother, their diet changes from milk to solid food, and they're often mixed with unfamiliar piglets. And mixing really is a major source of stress.
Stress during weaning can make piglets susceptible to disease, so antibiotics are fed to piglets after weaning to minimise the risk of poor health and performance.
Tell me about your research specifically.
I've been looking at ways of improving the welfare of pigs. This is through modifications to the housing environment or through procedures we do to pigs to reduce pain or to give them more enrichment in their environment so as to improve their mental well-being, if you like. And the thing about good animal welfare is that there's less stress on the animals. And it's the very same in humans. Where animals are stressed, their immune system is suppressed. The link that the area of science I work in now is really interested in is showing how the improved welfare transfers all the way down to reduced antimicrobial resistance.
Most farmers I've met are very knowledgeable and clued up on all of these things. Are they aware of resistance and all those issues?
Yeah, I mean, there's increasing awareness amongst farmers. I think they need a lot of support in terms of hopefully some of the research we're doing, but also from a financial point of view, because the profit margins are so tight in pig production that to make changes that will allow them to reduce antibiotic use is going to cost money. And I think we all have to acknowledge that. But if husbandry and housing are good and the nutrition of the pigs is good, we wanted to show that you can remove the antibiotics from the feed and instead opt for more targeted treatment of just animals that actually become sick. And we've shown that it is possible to do that on a commercial farm, not our research farm. It was possible to do it, and that farmer has continued with the reduced plan of antibiotic use.
Eugene Sheehan has been working with Teagasc to reduce the use of antibiotics on his farm.
Eugene, tell me exactly what you had to do.
First of all, we had to look at nutrition. Secondly, we looked at housing and the welfare of the pigs. Pigs go into a very dry, clean atmosphere, okay, and they have ties to play with, and they're not overstocked, and it takes all the pressure off the system and we are using vaccines instead of antibiotics.
So those two simple measures, making sure that they had a good diet and making sure that they had enough room and clean houses, meant that you were able to go antibiotic free?
Yes, well, not totally. Some farms at some point in the pig's life will need antibiotics.
But what's encouraging about your story is that by making those tweaks, by doing the changes, working with people like Laura, that you can do it.
You can do it, yes, you can do it, yes. Hopefully down the road, people will wise up to this and see the health benefits of this, okay, right? And it's the way farming should be done.
So is the benefit, if you were to sell your pork as antibiotic-free pork, really the consumer knows that they're happy pigs coming from nice houses? Yes. That's what the selling point is?
That's the selling point, yes. It's the way forward. I mean, antimicrobial resistance is a huge problem all over the world, not just in Ireland, but Ireland is probably 10 years ahead of most other countries with this in the usage of antibiotics.
Laura, why do farmers have to stop using antibiotics in agriculture?
Well, I suppose the reason is the link between antimicrobial resistance in animals and antimicrobial resistance in humans. There are no borders in the bacterial world, and the problem is that antimicrobial resistance could potentially transfer from animals to humans, and that would render antibiotics we currently use to treat disease in humans ineffective.
Of course, it's not just pig farming that's the problem. Antibiotics are given to other farm animals, and they're also essential to controlling bacterial diseases that affect our fruits and plants. Most human antibiotics are restricted from use in agriculture to protect their potency. However, there's mounting evidence linking the use of antibiotics in animals to resistant infections in humans.
Is there a market out there for antibiotic-free pork?
So the meat we are eating and the food products we're eating that come from animals are antibiotic-free. There are no antibiotics in them, and that's very important. The thing about the AMR is that the genes or the bacteria that are antimicrobial resistant could be in the meat if the animals are reared with a high level of antibiotics.
So my bacon sandwich is free from antibiotics, but it may not necessarily be free from resistant genes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so how do we tackle this problem in general?
Well, I think if we think of the One Health concept, and that's a lovely way of thinking about it because it shows how we're all so intricately linked, humans, animals and the environment. And it's going to take effort in all of those three areas to address this problem. There's no one group that's more responsible than the other. We as citizens are all socially responsible, just as we are for climate change, if you like, in addressing this antimicrobial resistance threat.
That's our 10 things to know about superbugs. Next week, we're investigating the awesome power of the sun.